Good morning, children. Let's continue the story of the Vistas, the enemy. And this story is written by famous writer Pearl S. Buck. Now let us continue with the story. I am quite sure you must be finding this story quite interesting. Should she help an enemy? That is the question in the mind of Hannah. So is it all right to help an enemy? That is what she is thinking. She is in dilemma. Nevertheless, now here what is happening? Even then, she told Yumi to fetch the hot water. So she has asked the maid servant, to get hot water, bring it to the room where the white man was. So she wants to wash or give a wash or clean the body of this American. And she thought that if she tells maidservant, she would do it. Will she do it? Let's see. She went ahead, slid back the partitions. So what she has now the partitions of the window she has slid back. So it's a sliding door for the windows. Sada was not yet there. Yumi following put down her wooden bucket. Then she went over to the white man. When she saw him, her thick lips folded themselves into stubbornness. So she saw what? That she had become stubborn, obstinate. I have never washed a white man, and I will not wash so dirty a one now. So she is resisting. She is obstinate. She is stubborn. She is not ready to wash this white man or to clean the body of this white man. Hannah cried at her severely. So she has shouted at her. She has screamed at her. You will do what your master commands you. So she's shouting at her and she's saying that you have to follow whatever the master says. You have to follow the orders of the master. There was so fierce a look of resistance upon Yumi's round, dull face that Hannah felt unreasonably afraid. Now remember, Hannah was thinking about the enemy and she was asking her maid servant to give a wash to the enemy. And she was resisting. Hannah suddenly became afraid. After all, if the servants should report something that was not as it happened, if they report to the police station, then suddenly she realized probably she should not do so, because out of anger the servants may do something. Very well, she said with dignity. You understand? We only want to bring him to his senses. See, what we want is to bring him to senses so that we can turn him over as a prisoner. I'll have nothing to do with it. Yumi said, I am a poor person and it is not my business. Say, I am first of all very poor and it's not my business. So she doesn't want to help or to do anything to this enemy. It's out of patriotism we can see all these servants, they are resisting that please return to your work. Now Anna understood that she is not ready to do anything whatever she commands. So therefore she says, you go back and do your work. Probably Yumi was waiting for that only and immediately she has left the room. Now who is all alone there with this American? That's Hannah. And when she is all alone there, there was no other go now because somebody has to clean the body. Now here she had been little bit afraid also. And she is staying there, it is because she had been a little bit afraid. Otherwise, she would not have preferred to stay all alone there with American's body or with American. Now, she suddenly felt how Yumi had reacted. Stupid Yumi. Is this anything but a man? What is he? He's an injured man, a wounded, helpless man, she's thinking about this. In the conviction of her own superiority, she bent impulsively. She was feeling that she has to do something, and she started doing it impulsively. And she was having firm belief in her, and probably as a doctor, she started untying the knotted rugs that kept the white man covered. When she had his breast bare, she dipped the small clean towel that Yumi had brought. So now she has to do all that because Yumi was not ready. And she soaked that towel with hot water and started washing his face. The man's skin, though rough with exposure, was of a fine texture. It must have been very blonde. It must have been very golden when he was a child. So here, Hannah was feeling angry because the maid servant had refused. But now she had no other way out and she had to wash his face. She had to clean the body of this American. She didn't like this man very much, but there was no other go for her. And the lot of thoughts were coming in her mind, but she did not have the courage to turn him over, and therefore she kept on doing the work. And her anger was ebbing, her anger was getting reduced. She was anxious again, she was worried over that. She rose, wiping her hands on the wrong towel. Then let the man be chilled. What will happen if we don't do anything? Then what will happen? This man will die of chill, will die of cold. He'll be frozen. And that's why he has put the quilt, he has put the blanket covering on his body. Sadao, she called softly. He had been about to come in when she called. His hand had been on the door. Now he opened it. She saw that he had brought his surgeon's emergency bag. So he was ready for operation. And he wore his surgeon's coat. You have decided to operate. She was surprised that here she came to know that he was ready to operate. Yes, he turned his back to her and unfolded a sterilized towel upon the floor of the tokonomo. Now, sterilized towel is put there on the floor and he is now very much ready. Alcove, now that's a part of the room where the flower arrangement is done there. So in that corner, now he is carrying out what he wants to carry out. Put his instruments out upon it. Fetch towels. She went obediently. But how anxious now to the linen shelves and took out the towels. She was getting worried. There ought also to be old pieces of matting so that the blood would not ruin the fine floor covering. She went out to back veranda where the gardener kept strips of matting with which to protect delicate shrubs on cold nights and took an armful of them. She thought that the mat would not get spoiled and that's why she thought of bringing that strip of matting which was there in the veranda. When she went back into the room, she saw this was useless because already it was all full of the blood. The blood had already soaked in that mat through the packing in the man's wound. So it had already come out profusely and it had ruined the mat where he was lying. Oh, the mat! And Sadao replied, it's ruined, it's all spoiled, as though he didn't care. Help me to turn him, he commanded. So he has given the order to turn him over. She obeyed him without a word. He began to wash the man's back carefully. Yumi would not wash him. So Yumi was not ready to wash him, and Yumi was reluctant to wash him because he was enemy. Did you wash him then? Sadao was not stopping for a moment, a swift, concise movement. He was carrying out whatever he wanted to do that. He was carrying out his operation. And he asked, did you give a wash to him? Yes, he said. He did not seem to hear. but she was used to his absorption. So he was totally absorbed in his work. He was ready for the operation. When he was at work, she wondered. So now he has started the operation. He is totally absorbed in his operation. So here it didn't matter to him what was the body upon which he worked so long. So whether he was American or whether Japanese, it didn't matter to him. He was a patient and he was supposed to treat that patient. You will have to give the anesthetic if he needs it. He said so. Though he was unconscious, anesthesia is required, and that's what he tells her. And therefore, oh, she says, I, but never have. It is easy. So he says, I have never given that. And Yumi, now here, she refuses, but he says, you need not worry about that. It is easy. He was taking out the packing now. So he was removing the packing that was done to the wound. The blood began to flow more quickly. So as a result, what has happened? The blood has started flowing very quickly now. He peered into the wound with a bright surgeon's light fastened on his forehead. The bullet is still there, he said with cool interest. So he comes to know that bullet is inside still there, and what they have to do is remove the bullet. Now I wonder how deep this rock is. So he also starts wondering how deep that wound is due to rock. If it is not too deep, it may be that I can get the bullet. But the bleeding is not superficial. So bleeding, whatever it is done, it is not at the surface only. Probably deep wound is there. He has lost much blood. So he has lost a lot of blood. So the wound is very, very deep. So at this moment, Hannah choked. Hannah choked. She started feeling a little bit choking sensation probably in the throat. Something blocking there in the throat. And when he saw her face, it had turned yellowish, very pale, the color of sulfur. Don't fade, become unconscious. He didn't put down his exploring instrument. He was busy in his work only. So he was trying to find out, explore with his instrument. If I stop now, the man will surely die because he had started bleeding profusely. He had removed whatever he had packed his wound with. She clapped her hands to her mouth. So she has held her mouth, leapt up, she jumped up and ran out of the room. She has gone out of the room. Outside in the garden, he heard her reaching. So she was trying to omit there outside in the garden. But he went on with his work. So he carried out his operation. So he's busy with his operation. It will be better for her to empty her stomach, he thought. It's a better if she empties her stomach, she will become all right. He had forgotten that, of course, she had never seen an operation. But her distress and his inability to go to her at once made him impatient. So he was becoming impatient. He wanted to see whether she was all right. It was becoming irritating thing, irritable with this man who lay like dead under his knife. He was totally unconscious and he was getting worried about his wife also, and at the same time he was carrying out the operation. Now let us see whatever we have studied. So let's revise whatever we have studied in the last few days. Now, Dr. Sadao Hoki and his traditional father. Dr. Sadao Hoki is the protagonist, is the main character. He's a doctor, and here an injured soldier is the one whom he has to treat. But that is an enemy. Dr. Sadaoki, a famous Japanese surgeon and an accomplished scientist, lived in a house on the Japanese coast. The house was set upon rocks above a narrow beach surrounded by pine trees. As a child, Sadao used to climb these trees. He often visited the South Sea Islands with his father. His father believed that the islands were stepping stones to Japan's future to gain perfection. Sadao's father was a very serious and traditional man. He was a very conservative man. He never joked, so very serious man, or played with him, but took infinite pains for his son. but he was very much concerned about his son. Sadao's education was his chief concern. He once sent Sadao to America to complete his studies. So for further studies, he sent him to America and he remained there in America for 8 years. Sadao's father inculcated in him values of patriotism and national loyalty when the latter was quite young, and Sadao had always cherished these great values. The Second World War had started, but Sadao was not sent with the troops because he was about to make a discovery which would render wounds entirely clean, and also the general wanted him to remain there. Also, the general, who was quite old, was being treated by Sadao. He might require an operation any time, and he trusted Sadao very much. The prisoner is washed ashore. One night, Sadao and Hana were enjoying the view of the sea from their veranda when they saw something black coming out of the mist. And it was a man. Who was he? He was an American. He staggered a few steps and then the mist hid him again. They thought probably a fisherman. When they saw again he was crawling, Sadao thought he was a fisherman washed ashore from his boat. The surf beyond the beach, that's a waves. Foam beyond the beach was spiked with rocks. The man might be badly hurt. They found the man wounded. Hannah realized that it was a white man. He was American. The fellow was young and unconscious. The man was bleeding profusely. Sadao saw that a bullet wound had reopened. Sadao packed the wound with sea moss. The man moaned with pain, but he did not awaken. So he was remaining unconscious there, but he was crying with pain. Sadao wanted to throw the man back into the sea, as he had now realized that he was an American prisoner of war. Hana also agreed. Sadao knew that giving shelter to the enemy would get him into trouble. If it is found that he had sheltered an enemy, then definitely Sadao and his wife would be killed. And if they hand him over to the police, definitely he would be killed. So that's why he faces the dilemma. He was torn between his moral duty as a doctor. As a doctor, he should treat his patient. He should save the dying man. As a humanist, he should save the dying man, which urged him to save the dying man, and his national duty, which required handing him over to the army as a patriot. Both Hana and Sadao finally decided to take the man home as he was in need of urgent medical attention. Now, now let's see the reactions of the servants. The servants have reacted very bitterly. They decided that they should tell the servants also. So they have brought this man into their house. They would tell them that they intended to hand him over to the police. The man had been starved for a long time and he was light as a fowl. So there was hardly any flesh in him. They carried him to Sadao's father's bedroom as his father was no longer alive. The old man had never allowed a foreign object in his room. The American was very dirty and needed to be washed. Hannah said that Yumi might wash her. She went to fetch her. When she returned to the kitchen, she found that the other two servants were also frightened, and Sadao had told them. The servants tried to convince Sadao that he must hand over the enemy to the police. Yumi refused to wash the American, and Hannah had to wash himself. Hannah had to wash herself to this American. Sadao saves this enemy. Now, as a doctor, he has to save the patient. Sadao was ready to operate. He was completely absorbed in his work. He told Hannah that she would need to give anesthetic to the man. And he told her that it's quite easy. Hannah probably had never seen an operation and started vomiting. Sadao was irritable and impatient with his enemy as he was not able to help Anna in her distress. She was in trouble, but he could do nothing. Now he is in dilemma. The man groaned with pain, and he was groaning with pain. Interestingly enough, Anna was able to assist her husband in the operation, and this way Dr. Sadao saves the enemy's life. So with this, we end this session, and in the next session, let's continue this story, The Enemy, which is quite interesting. Dr. Sadao, as a doctor, has to do his duty, and he has done his duty. But is he in trouble? Let's see in the next part. Thank you. Goodbye.